This video is for AQA A-Level Economics Paper 3 and it's looking at the June 2024 paper for the Synoptic 25 marker. So when we're looking at the 25 marker, just a reminder that this is a pretty significant case study, and when you get to that 25 marker, you've already done the 10 marker and you've already done the 15 marker, and all the figures and extracts that you've used previously could still come in useful for this 25 marker and some more as well. So the question was, after considering extract D and the original evidence in A, B and C, would you recommend that the government intervene in the economy to try to reduce the differences in the economic prosperity of the various regions of the UK? Justify your recommendation. So what this video is going to do is just simply going to provide you with observations that I made whilst marking this paper, and just to give you an idea as to how to answer this 25 marker. Now in paper 3, 25 markers, not always but commonly, it's whether the government should intervene, yes, no, and sometimes they might bring in and how. This question is simply asking you, should they intervene, yes or no? So my first observation based on this is probably the most important. Do you actually understand what the question is asking? The focus of this question is absolutely crucial, and a lot of students do not fully address this. This is a market failure versus government failure question. So in other words, if the government doesn't intervene, how likely is market failure? And if the government does intervene, how likely is government failure? And that's really what the question's asking. Now, you have to obviously understand what market failure is taking place, and hopefully by doing the 10 marker, you'll recognise that the market failure is to do with regional inequality and the inefficient allocation of these resources across regions. And it gives you clues as to how far back this dates to, and it is looking at the era of deindustrialisation. So straight away, the first thing you could be thinking about is, well, if this dates back to deindustrialisation and it's still not being resolved, and in fact it's getting worse, then surely the government does need to intervene. So when addressing the question, there's also more than one focus. Yes, it is about market failure. Yes, it is about government intervention. Yes, it is about government failure. But it's also about economic prosperity as well. And you need to make sure that you do refer to that. So a lot of students made the mistake of almost recreating the question and looking at how the government should intervene. That's not what the question's asking. So a lot of students struggle to get into level 4 because they just simply analysed ways of intervention, which doesn't tackle the demands of the question, and therefore it's going to limit your ability to get focused analysis. Right, my second observation is looking at the data. This is a data response. This is the ultimate data response because you've got so much data, so you have to respond to the data. And the students who do not address the data, again, are not able to offer the depth and the breadth that's needed within this 25 marker. Now, the case study is your best friend in this because it provides you with all the clues. All the information as to why the government should or shouldn't intervene, you will find it in the extracts. You just need to look. So, a prime example, in a part of the case study, it refers to creative destruction. Now, it does actually come across quite random in the case study, but again, you're thinking, well, the lead examiners created this case study. Everything in the case study is there for a reason. It might not necessarily be to do for the 25 marker, but it might be. So if they're bringing in this kind of free market economist looking at creative destruction, there's a reason for it. And the reason for this is because it was providing you with an argument as to why the government might not need to intervene. So it's trying to say that, yes, new industries replace outdated ones. At this moment in time, the North East is just trying to, or they have to innovate to be able to move on from deindustrialisation. They've not done it yet, but once they do it, they'll prosper. It also refers to market forces, so you could look at wage mechanisms. It mentions how with movement towards the South East for better jobs, because there's higher salaries, or because of lower costs associated with the North East, firms might relocate. So it's providing you these free market arguments, and it's all in the case study. But it does also tell you why the government need to intervene, even if we go back to figure 3. And what sometimes happens is that students spend a lot of time on the 10 marker, they do a fantastic 10 mark in terms of data analysis, and then they get to the 25 marker, and it's almost as if those figures never existed. Those figures might still be useful. So if you look at the productivity gap, for example, between the northeast and southeast and just the average UK, it gives you more ammunition as to why the government probably does need to intervene. And there's other examples in the figures. So again, look at figure 2. Look at the inactivity rates. If there's high inactivity rates, think about the impact that's having on regional productivity, but also national productivity as well. Now, if there's inactivity, we need to consider the reasons as to possibly why there might be inactivity. And it might be down to a lack of mobility. And there's also clues in the case study based on that. So some of the figures will relate to some of the written extracts, and it will just strengthen that application. Right, third observation was to do with evaluation. Are you evaluating throughout your response? And a prime example of how you can do that is just referring to the focus. So if you're creating arguments as to why the market can self-correct and there's no need for government intervention, then when you're evaluating that argument, then you're looking at, well, yeah, but actually it's had a lot of time to do that and it hasn't done it. Inequality is getting worse, and therefore there's a huge possibility of market failure. And from carrying out that counterpoint has some evaluation, but then how you kind of summarize it and how you look at it holistically, and I suppose your use of evaluative language, then you'll bring in the evaluation. And again, the government does need to intervene, but it does matter how they intervene. And if they intervene in a way that could have unintended consequences, then what are those consequences? And we could then evaluate via government failure. Now, in the case study, and again, I know that there's time pressure involved and you have to look through this case study and you will sometimes miss key points, but it does say that the UK is becoming one of the most geographically unequal countries. Now, if that is not telling you that what your overall judgment is, then I'm not sure what else could. This is telling you that yes, the government does need to intervene. Because for it to become one of the most geographically unequal countries, that's really, really significant. And that tells you that this is a really, really fundamental issue with the UK economy. So this is my example. I start off with an introduction, and the reason why I do that is just to kind of like bring out the key focus of the question and make sure that I fully understand what the question's asking. It also does give me the ability to show off a bit of knowledge and understanding. Then I bring in my first point. So does the government need to intervene? So form the arguments of the invisible hand. If the government leave the market alone, the market will self-correct. And I bring in my free market arguments. I talk about if there's excess demand for labour in the southeast, this will signal suppliers to increase the wage rate for workers. And then those wanting to better themselves will be incentivised to relocate to such regions to seek better work opportunities, lowering both the inactivity and the unemployment rates currently being experienced in the northeast. Or look at it from the other point of argument, or due to the profit incentive, as these labour costs rise, firms seeking to profit maximise might choose to relocate or naturally expand in lower prosperity regions due to the excess supply of labour. This would then result in employment opportunities supporting the security of such people with a stable income, boosting their disposable income and their financial well-being. Now, the reason why I'm mentioning financial well-being is because of economic prosperity being the focus. Then I bring in the creative destruction argument, and I talk about how they might be able to adapt to new industries. But I also need to obviously evaluate this. So this is my analytical argument for market forces. So how do I evaluate? Yet, this hasn't happened yet. So when will this innovative movement take place? I bring in a famous Keynes argument in terms of in the long run we're all dead anyway. And whilst we wait for the market to self-correct, the regional inequality continues to worsen. Will it ever happen? With geographical and occupational immobility causing structural unemployment, it could be argued that there's little ability to access jobs in more productive regions for those living in the northeast, or the gains from being in the southeast regarding external economies of scale diminishes the differentials in cost advantages for the northeast as firms with lower unit costs regardless of wage and land costs. So the presence of many firms means industries develop specialist suppliers and it becomes a hub for innovation as well as excellent transport links. So then I bring in my diagram. So what I'm saying here is, it doesn't matter if there's lower labour costs in the northeast. If they're occupationally immobile, actually it might not necessarily help anyway. And also because the external economies of scale you get in the southeast, you're going to be reducing unit costs externally anyway. So then I say, well, the government needs to intervene then. And look at how I bring in my data. So I bring in my GDP per capita. I bring in some other data as well in terms of my labour productivity. So I've talked about how we're over dependent on the southeast, and the GDP is really being concentrated in the southeast, whilst other obviously regions are not helping with that national productivity rate. So I've talked about deindustrialisation, I've talked about the need for investment, and I've brought in these arguments. I've used key terminology such as interventionist supply side policies regarding capital investment. So make sure that you are showing off your theoretical knowledge to the examiner. You don't just want to regurgitate the case study. And then I say about, okay, but what are the issues? And again, these issues are highlighted in the case study. It does mention about the cost to the government. So then all I've simply done is I've kind of extended that with my theoretical knowledge and talked about high national debt. I've talked about the crowding out effect. And I've talked about in terms of how that might have an impact on private sector investment. But then I've also evaluated that point, saying, yeah, the private sector investment in the North East has been very low, and therefore if such allocation of investment by the private sector isn't occurring, as it isn't justifying their returns, then perhaps it is for the government to borrow and accept such a trade-off. So there's key, very, very strong evaluation in that last paragraph there. So I bring in my case study, and have you noticed how I kind of annotate my case study to kind of show key points? And then I have my overall judgment. So in judgment to the question, I believe that the government must intervene, and I kind of I don't just summarise it, but I place weighted judgment and justification as to why.